The first thing I noticed when the smoke cleared was the silence, thick, endless, terrifying. No engines, no radio chatter, no shouting from the cockpit. Just the ocean breathing around us and the wreckage of a seaplane rocking gently against black volcanic sand. I was alive, and so was my boss. She stood a few feet away from me, barefoot, her tailored blazer torn at the sleeve, saltwater dripping from her hair like tears she hadn't yet allowed herself to cry. Victoria Hale, CEO, iron-willed, brilliant, untouchable Victoria Hale, looked small for the first time since I'd known her. We were stranded on a deserted island. And that moment, standing between the twisted metal of our failed escape and a jungle that looked like it swallowed secrets whole, was when everything I thought I knew about her, and myself, began to unravel. The trip wasn't supposed to happen like this. It was meant to be a quick corporate retreat, a publicity visit to a new offshore resort development. I was her executive assistant, the invisible man who organized calendars, caught mistakes before they happened, and never crossed lines. She was efficient, distant, and allergic to anything that resembled vulnerability. The storm came out of nowhere. One moment we were flying over a sheet of blue glass, the next the sky cracked open like it had been waiting for us. The pilot tried to turn back, but the engine coughed, then screamed. I still remembered the way Victoria's hand found my arm in that split second before impact. Not commanding, not composed, human. Now the pilot was gone. The radio was dead. The emergency flare had misfired. And the island, stretching empty and wild before us, didn't look like it appeared on any map. We spent the first day in survival mode. Shock has a way of making time elastic. Victoria assessed the wreckage with the same precision she used in boardrooms, cataloging what we could salvage. I gathered what I could. Bottled water, a first aid kit, a half-burned flare gun. We built a crude shelter from plane debris and palm fronds before night fell, the sky bleeding orange and purple like a wound closing too slowly. When darkness came, it came completely. The sounds of the island were louder than my thoughts. Rustling leaves, distant cries, the rhythmic crash of waves. Victoria sat across from me by a small fire we barely managed to start. Firelight softened her sharp features, erased the polished armor she wore every day. "You did well today," she said quietly. It startled me more than the crash had. Praise from her was rare. Personal acknowledgement was rarer. "You did too," I replied. She nodded, staring into the flames. "I don't like not being in control." That was the closest thing to a confession I'd ever heard from her. The days blurred together. We rationed food, learned which fruits were safe, set traps that caught nothing but our frustration. We climbed the highest point of the island every morning to search the horizon. Every afternoon, we returned with the same empty view. At first, we talked about work. About projects left unfinished. About meetings we were missing. It was a way to pretend this was temporary, an inconvenience rather than a reality. But as the sun rose and set without rescue, the conversations changed. She told me about growing up poor, about a mother who worked herself into exhaustion and a father who left early. She talked about how success became her shield, how love always felt conditional, something you earned, something you could lose. I told her about my quiet life, about dreams I'd shelved because they felt impractical. About how I'd convinced myself that stability was enough, even when it wasn't. One night, after a storm drenched our shelter and soaked us to the bone, Victoria laughed. Not a polite, controlled laugh, but a broken, helpless one. She sat on the sand, hair plastered to her face, rain mixing with tears she didn't bother wiping away. "This is ridiculous," she said. "I run a billion-dollar company, and I can't keep the rain off my head." I sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her skin despite the cold. "You're allowed to be human here." She looked at me then, really looked at me, like she was seeing me for the first time without titles between us. "I don't know who I am without my work," she admitted. Something in her voice cracked something open in me too. Days turned into weeks. We stopped counting. The island stripped us down to essentials: food, shelter, honesty. Without mirrors, without schedules, without the world watching, we became versions of ourselves we didn't know existed. Victoria learned how to laugh without restraint. I learned how to speak without fear. There were moments of despair. Days when the horizon felt like a cruel joke. Nights when hunger gnawed and hope felt thinner than the smoke from our fire. And yet, there were moments of peace too. Watching the sun rise together. Sharing stories under a sky so full of stars it felt unreal. Sitting shoulder to shoulder, saying nothing, needing nothing more. One evening, as the ocean reflected the moon like shattered glass, she broke the silence. "If no one comes," she said softly, not looking at me, "will you stay with me?" The question wasn't desperate. It wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, fragile, terrifying in its honesty. I felt the weight of it settle in my chest. She wasn't just asking about the island. She was asking about a future stripped of ambition, of image, of expectation. A future built on companionship instead of control. "I don't know," I said truthfully. "But I know I wouldn't leave you alone." She closed her eyes, breathing out slowly, like she'd been holding that breath for years. Something shifted between us after that. Not suddenly, not recklessly, but inevitably. A shared touch lingering longer than necessary. A look held a moment too long. Love growing not from convenience, but from survival, from seeing each other at our weakest and choosing not to turn away. The rescue came on a morning that felt no different from the others. A distant hum, a speck on the horizon. Hope rising so fast it hurt. We stood together on the beach, waving frantically, shouting until our throats burned. When the helicopter descended, wind whipping sand into our faces, Victoria's hand found mine again. This time, she didn't let go. Back in the world, everything moved too fast. Questions, cameras, medical exams. The company stock surged. The story became a headline, then a myth. And just like that, the island was behind us. Victoria returned to her office. I returned to my desk. But something was different. She called me into her office one evening, long after everyone else had gone home. The city lights glowed behind her like a second skyline. "I can't go back to who I was," she said. "And I don't want to pretend nothing happened." Neither did I. She stepped closer. No power imbalance. No fear. Just two people who had faced emptiness together and found something worth holding onto. "I don't need you to stay," she said. "I want you to choose." I thought of the island. Of the silence. Of the stars. Of the question she'd asked me when nothing else mattered. "I choose you," I said. The world didn't end. It didn't explode into scandal. It simply adjusted. We learned how to build something real in a world that rewards masks. It wasn't easy. Love rarely is. But it was honest. Sometimes, late at night, we sit quietly together. No phones, no meetings, no noise. And I see it in her eyes, the woman who once stood barefoot on black sand, afraid and alive and asking a question that changed everything. We were stranded once, but what we found there wasn't isolation. It was home.